Welcome to another live Action for Happiness event. My name is Mark Williamson, and I'm really glad to be welcoming you all to this event called Less Busy, More Happy, a topic that I think resonates with so many of us in a world that feels relentlessly busy. So, thank you for being here. And I'm delighted to welcome our special guest for today's conversation, Professor Cassie Holmes. Cassie, it's lovely to have you with us. Thanks.
Well, thanks so much for having me. Good morning from me, but I know good evening for you. It's great to be here.
Well, we're joined by people, as ever, from all around the world, members of the Action for Happiness movement, people who are united in a desire to create a happier and kinder world together. So, thank you for being here if you're a regular, and welcome if you're new to this amazing community. Cassie and I are going to have a conversation together for just over half an hour to share her great work, the wonderful book, Happier Hour, that you can see in her background there, that has been an influence on me, and there's a lot of wisdom we're going to work through together. You all have a chance to participate as the audience in some of the things we're going to learn along the way. And then you'll also have a chance to put your questions to Cassie towards the end of the event. So, really, without further ado, Cassie, maybe we could start. You're obviously a professor at UCLA, you're an author, you're an expert in particularly time and happiness. But maybe you could tell us a bit about you and not only your professional context, but why this topic is of such interest to you.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. Yeah. So, I'm a professor at UCLA in the business school, and I have actually spent my professional career in the business school. My PhD was in the Bay Area at Stanford in the business school. And I highlight that because even back when I was getting my PhD, there was so much focus on money as the outcome, as the thing that we were looking to sort of optimize and accrue from a business perspective. But then, even at that point, I was like, yes, money is important because it's a resource that allows us to gain and access the things that we want and need. But I was like, time. Time is even more critical as a resource because of the simple fact, right? Like how we spend the hours of our days sum up to the years of our lives. So not only is it a resource that we sort of look to invest to gain what we want, but it's also the end in itself. Our time is our life. But my early work, actually, my dissertation work was finding the benefits of focusing on time as our most critical resource compared to money. But then I'm like, oh my gosh, yes, it's so important. But when I think about my own time, I get super stressed out, right? Because and we can talk about the sense of time poverty, feeling like we have too much to do and not enough time to do it. And I share this sort of story in the opening of my book, Happier Hour, which is actually based off of my research on this intersection of time and happiness, and based off of this course that I teach to our MBAs at UCLA Anderson called Applying the Science of Happiness to Life Design. But I share this story at the beginning of my book that captures my relationship with time, which started off as not very happy at all. And it was back when, so before I was at UCLA, I was on the faculty at Wharton. So I was living in Philly. And as an assistant professor, I had a baby and I was invited to give a talk in New York. And I had traveled up from Philadelphia to New York to give this talk. And it just sort of was one of these crazy, hectic days that I suspect people can relate to because I'm like taking the train up early in the morning, then rushing from meeting to meeting into this super pressureful talk, then into more meetings, and then into this dinner. And then I was like, oh my gosh, I need to leave. And I jump in a cab to make the very last train that would get me home to my 4 month old and my husband asleep in Philly. And I did make the train, but I just remember so vividly feeling sort of broken that it's like exhausted and overwhelmed. And I was like, I don't know if I can keep up because the pressures of work, wanting to be a good parent, wanting to be a good friend, the never-ending pile of chores, there were not enough hours in the day to get it all done. But then it's not just a question of how many hours you have to get things done, but also being able to have enough time to slow down and actually experience the time that we're spending. And so I really was like, it's just too much. Maybe I quit. But instead of quitting, I'm like, actually, there are other people that are dealing with this issue. And as a researcher of time and happiness, I'm like, I need to actually empirically figure this out. And so that is what has propelled my research for the last 10 years now, or now 12 years. My baby is now 12, to look at how should we be thinking about and spending our time for greater happiness? What is this feeling of time poverty? What drives it? What are the consequences, etc.?
Thank you, Cassie. I think you've captured in your own story something that probably feels familiar to many, that sense of overwhelm of having found ourselves, perhaps through a mixture of things outside of our control and also choices we've made, with just just the idea that there isn't enough time. And I was going to sort of say, let's frame this a little bit about the issue, but you've actually done that really beautifully in your own story. But maybe before I want to turn in a moment to do something interactive with the audience, but let's just say a little bit more about this idea of time poverty.
Yes.
Is it common that most of us feel that we don't have enough time? And presumably it's got quite a few negative consequences, including some that you've already hinted at, but like that we're maybe not our best selves when we're in that situation. Do you want to say a bit about that?
Absolutely. So, just to be very clear, what time poverty is, it is the acute feeling of having too much to do and not enough time to do it. And I highlight that role of feeling because it is a subjective state. It is this sense of not being able to achieve what we set out to do because of this constraint of time. And you asked, is it like, is it all of us that feel this way? It's not all of us, but it's a lot of us. We conducted a national poll in the US, and these numbers are very reflective of folks in the UK as well, where we found that more than half, 53% of people agreed with the statement, I never seem to have enough time to get it all done. And I suspect that even more than half here, because folks are joining based off of the title of like, oh my God, less busy. They want to be because I suspect that many people here feel this way. And looking at the data, we see also like who's sort of most susceptible. And we see that actually women tend to feel more time poor than men. Um, People who are working and not just working for pay, but also working, taking care of the home and children, also feel more time poor. When your partner is working as well, and you have kids that are particularly under the age of 4, but also having kids at home, those are the folks who feel most time stressed. But we also see in the data that even those who do not have kids and even those who do not work for pay, as well as men, all types of people are susceptible to feeling this way. And it is prevalent. And not only is this a serious issue because of its prevalence, but also, as you mentioned, the effects are really negative and far-reaching because research shows that when we feel time poor, it makes us less healthy, right? And that makes sense. We're less likely to make the time to exercise. We don't sleep enough. We eat fast food because it's fast, not because it's healthy. It makes us less nice. So when we're in a hurry, and my children and husband can absolutely attest to this. When I feel like
Mine
I'm in a
too. Yeah.
hurry and time poor, I am less nice. I am yelling at them to hurry up. And also, people are less likely to slow down and help others out. They're less confident. They feel less self-efficacious. And here we are talking about happiness. There is clear data to show that when we feel time poor, we feel less happy in our days. We feel less satisfied in our lives. And that less happiness is really sort of driven by heightened feelings of stress.
Mm.
So this is an issue and something that because it's an issue that I personally experienced, then I was like, oh my gosh, this is something we have to address because it's a feeling. What are these decisions that we can make or these circumstances that we can put ourselves into sort of offset this negative feeling and feel less stress in our days, more satisfied in our lives.
Well, I'm really looking forward to us sharing some of your great tips for this. I'm also slightly smiling and with love and respect to Madalena, who's just said, "Sorry, have to leave now. We'll watch the recording." There's somebody who's too busy to be here for the whole of a busy event,
Totally.
which is fair enough. I've done the same myself. Quite ironic and amusing. I would like us to pause and do a little reflection that you suggested, Cassie, which I really love, with the audience, which we might come back to later. So, folks, there's a question I'd like to think about, or Cassie has asked us to think about. What is something you wish you had time to do, but you don't because you're time poor? And I guess that could be a little sort of day-to-day thing, or it could be a bigger thing, bigger project, bigger life mission. Maybe if you'd like to take a few moments to think about that, and if you want to share a few words in the chat, I can just read a few of these out and we can reflect on them. So I'm seeing reading more books, exercising, writing more, no longer playing music, art, working my business, breathing, completing a project, meditating, pottering about, sorting out pictures, time with friends, studying, getting back to playing the piano, sitting still, renovating, dancing, having more recreation, publishing books, cooking sausage rolls, whole day hikes, playing with the dogs. I mean, what a lovely list, first of all. But Cassie, what are you seeing as these all fly past?
Well, I'm like I mean, it's inspiring because these are things that we are motivated to do, we want to do. But sometimes we are limited because we're like, oh my gosh, with all the other things I have to do, with the limited hours I have in my day, maybe even though they are so desirable, we don't feel like we have the time to do those things. And what is sort of the quick good news is that actually we recognizing those things that are really important to us, we can end up making the time, prioritizing the time, spending time on these things that we love so much, and actually, if there's some tactics and tricks and perspective that we can employ to find little bits of time in our weeks to invest in these things that really matter to us. And then, as a consequence, not only do we actually feel happier, but in my work, we have found that actually spending time on these energy giving activities make us feel like we have more time. Um, we have data that actually shows, I was talking about kindness, that even though when people feel time poor, they're less likely to slow down and help others out. Um, we found that actually when people do spend time to help another, and then they actually feel like they have more time because they realize how much they accomplished with the time that they had. We even ran this experiment where in the morning we randomly assign people spend 30 minutes today doing something for yourself that you weren't already planning to do, or 30 minutes today doing something for someone else that you weren't already planning to do. I saw someone say on the thing they wish they had time for was doing something kind for another, volunteering. And then we followed up with folks at the end of the day, and what we found was that those who had spent time on someone else actually felt more like they had more time in general, because when we spend time on something, it's like, oh my gosh, I spent 30 minutes helping someone. In some cases, some of the participants like help their neighbors shovel snow off their porch, go to the park, pick up litter for a half hour, sit down, write a note to their grandmother, give their good friend a call to tell them that they were thinking of them. These are things that only take 30 minutes. And often they're things that we neglect because we're like, we don't have time. But in fact, spending that time makes us feel like, oh my gosh, I can accomplish a lot in the time that I have. And therefore, it make you feel like you have more time in general.
Well, I'm a big fan of that particular set of insights because anyone who's connected with the Action for Happiness community knows that we think of kindness and caring for the happiness of others as an absolutely fundamental. So that's lovely to hear. But it strikes me that that point about it not necessarily taking huge amounts of elapsed time also applies to quite a few other things in that list, like spending time with pets, breathing, painting, walking. And I think I've heard you talk about the difference between focusing on quantity and quality. Could you help us
Yeah.
sort of explore that a little bit?
Absolutely. And I think that even sort of before digging into that, of even that setup of when I was talking about me feeling very time poor on the train that night, I was sort of thinking, actually, the answer is that I have to quit everything. And I had this notion that if I just quit my job, then I would have more time available. And interestingly, we actually analyzed what is the relationship between the amount of discretionary time people have and their happiness, their life satisfaction, to test whether, in fact, people who have a whole lot more time are, in fact, happier. And in our one of our studies, what we did was we analyzed data from the American Time Use Survey. So it captures how tens of thousands of working as well as non-working Americans spent a regular day. And from that, we could see how much time they spent on discretionary activities and relate that to their own self-reported life satisfaction and their happiness. And what we found in that study, like we did across the studies, we found this consistent pattern of results, which was an upside down U shape, which is really interesting because what it shows is that actually happiness goes down on both ends of the spectrum. Yes, people with too little time. In this data set, those with less than approximately 2 hours of discretionary time in the day were less happy because of the higher levels of stress. But we also saw that people with more than approximately 5 hours in the day were also less happy. And for them, it was because when they had all the hours of the day that they were spending with nothing to show for it, it undermined their sense of purpose. And from feeling less productive in one's life overall, then that undermined life satisfaction. So it's not that
So
more
there's a
time is
sweet
better.
spot in a way. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. And actually, the sweet spot is quite a wide range. So between those between 2 and 5 hours of discretionary time in the day, actually the relationship is flat. That is, it's not about how much time you're spending on it, your discretionary activities. Then it gets into, okay, what is the quality of that time? And also, and even when I'm like 2 hours for the busy folks listening, you might be like, oh my gosh, 2 hours. That sounds like no way can I find 2 hours in my day to spend how I want. But then when I did this sort of calculation of my time, even during that busy time, I actually recognized that there were many minutes that were just truly joyful that I wouldn't have wanted to spend in any other way. It's like snuggling with my baby before the day even started, right? Talking to my best friend on my commute home from work, sitting down with my husband for dinner and a glass of wine. And yes, I would love it to be 2 hours dinner and it's only like 25 minutes because we have a new baby. But those 25 minutes, we're in it together. We're paying attention to each other. And then it's like 20 minutes singing my little one to sleep, or it might be 20 minutes for someone else reading a book, picking up a book they actually want, as opposed to the sort of mindless turning on the TV or scrolling through social media. So this is all pointing to that it isn't about the quantity of time that we have available, that is about how much happiness we get, but it's really about the quality of that time. And also, I think that something that's really helpful as an exercise to do is to track. So I suggest I have my students do this time tracking assignment over the course of a week, writing down for each half hour what they're doing, and being more specific than just work or socializing, because if you look at the time tracking research, on average, people are less happy during their work hours and more happy when they're socializing. But it's not like all work hours are similarly negative, and it's not like every time you're socializing, it's necessarily fun. So, writing down what activities are you doing, and as importantly, rating on a 10-point scale coming out of that activity, how satisfied are you? And it's a tedious exercise to do, but it's really helpful because what it does is it highlights actually what are those ways that you're spending already that are sources of joy. and satisfaction, and what are some commonalities across those activities that get your highest ratings. But also, it shows how much time you're spending on your various activities. So you can see for those of us who are time poor, and it's like, oh my gosh, I had no idea I was spending that much time watching TV. You know, as you go home at the end of the night, you turn on an episode thinking it'll be one, but then you say yes to next episode on Netflix, and then it's 4 hours later, and same the next night. I actually saw that something that they wish they had time to do, that they don't feel like they have time to do it, was go back to school. And that is actually an activity that takes a lot of time. But one of my former students, he told me that he was listening to me on a podcast and talking about this time tracking exercise, which he then went to do. And in doing it, he realized that he was spending tens of hours a week playing video games. Like that was absorbing so much of his time. And then he was like, wait a second, I could spend those same tens of hours pursuing an MBA. And so he applied to our MBA program and did the program because he was in my class, um, because he recognized through a like honest observation of where he was spending his time that there was actually more time available to him. And then it's a question of investing and spending his time on something that mattered so much to him, as opposed to something that actually, from his own ratings, wasn't a source of satisfaction. I saw a lot of
Mm.
people said reading for pleasure. If you actually tracked your time and saw how much time you were mindlessly scrolling on your phone, instead of the mindless scrolling, you sort of, put it in a little phone jail and you have a book, then you can have a surprising amount of time available for these things that we want, or listening
Yeah,
to
I,
audiobooks.
I really like this idea because in many ways this is a form of mindfulness. It's been bringing our attention back to the conscious choices we're making and getting off autopilot and being a bit more deliberate.
Mhm.
Now, I'd like us to do a little reflection exercise with the audience now. We can't go and do that sort of journaling of how we're spending our time in this kind of context, but we can look back over recent times and tap into one of the things you mentioned, which is the times where we really have felt joyful or satisfied and so on. So maybe you could sort of set that up for us. How could we get people to think about identifying some of those moments that have been special recently?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would encourage everyone to think back over your last 3 weeks and think about and actually even write down what were those 3 times that you felt joy, that you felt happiest. And I would encourage you to write them down. And actually, I would love to invite folks to enter into the chat. And note that what I'm not asking is you to think in general, what do you like to do? This isn't a belief thing or a perspective thing. This is reflecting on your own experience, how you've spent your time. When did you feel most joy, and perhaps even why?
Preparing and drinking my loose leaf tea, being on my bicycle. I very much agree with that one. That's fantastic. Jogging. I felt joyful when I was productive. Art, sitting outside. I showed some people around my local town, running in the countryside, eating with my family. Took my daughter to, I didn't see what there, dancing at a rave. That's great. Resting, walking my dog, living room dancing, speaking with my nephew, cycling again. Well done, folks. Laughing with others, yeah, sailing, completing a 10K, something about charity. What a lovely list. And as you say, actually, they're very specific, aren't they? They're very much actual moments in people's recent lives.
Yeah, what you also notice, which is really neat, is that some of these things are, if I were to say for you, do this, you're like, oh my God, this is a task that I have to do, like driving your or taking your kid to a gymnastics class. It's like, oh, something to do. But recognizing and actually being in that time with your daughter, it's not a chore, it's not a task. It's actually, if it's 30 minutes, going on the tube or in the car with your daughter, that's time to chat. And it's time for the two of you. Or exercising. Some are like, oh, exercising is something you tell me I should do. But when you actually do it, and in the time tracking work, actually, this is a big one that pops up that people are like, oh, something that I dread, like exercise. When you actually do it, you're swimming or, cycling or going for a run, when not only when you're doing it, but as you come out of it, you have this huge mood boost. And then that mood boost actually carries over to influence your subsequent activities and how you feel. And so, again, this is pointing that it's not quantity of time you spend, it's really the quality, because the quality of any particular activity can actually have a sort of much larger influence of how we feel in our weeks and about our lives.
Yeah, well, first of all, I thank you everyone who shared things. They're still flying past in the chat, which is making me realize how precious this time is. I'm hearing various different insights you've already shared, Cassie. There was that one about, we're sometimes using our time not very wisely and wasting time on watching programs and so on. But you've sort of hinted at something there, which I'd love to explore a little more. It's perhaps not so much that we're using our time differently, that we're thinking about our time differently. So we might be doing the same activity, but instead of thinking of it as a waste of time or a thing we have to do, we're sort of noticing that it's also joyful. So
Absolutely.
even before we get to choosing how we do things differently, I think you're asking us to sort of think differently about how we use our time. Is that right?
Yeah, and it's reflecting and recognizing that there is actually such joy in the time that we're already spending. So it's not like creating more time for something else to do in many cases. It is, given the time that you're spending, of actually paying attention and noticing the joy that is right there. I talk about this a lot because it is, when I reflect on my moments of joy. This my coffee date with my daughter. It's really an interesting thing because it did start off as a task of me dropping the big brother and off at the carpool, and then she was at preschool on campus. And so after dropping off the big kids and driving her to her preschool, I want coffee. So it's like a mindless routine that is something to check off my list of get her to school and me to work. But we turned this routine into this like treasured ritual. We made it special. We have coffee date playlist, and then it's become this like really treasured half hour where it's the two of us chatting. It's like actually very similar to the person who was like, oh, taking my daughter to gymnastics. Like, yes, it's a task, but if you frame it as this ritual of this time together, then actually the time that you're already spending becomes really special and impactful. And there is research on rituals and these rituals don't have to be based in anything religious. Although I did see that someone was like, actually, their time worshiping was a source of joy. So it can have that sort of spiritual quality, but it doesn't need to. In fact, it can very much be in these simple moments of like, relishing that coffee in the morning or having this shared moment with someone you love. Uh, or actually, the morning exercise for me, my morning run is quite sort of divine. Yes, it's a task, but it's also my time that I get to just sort of have to myself to think, to see the sunrise. And so there is a lot of joy right there in the time that we already have if we pay attention.
There's a lovely quote that says something like, enjoy the little things, for one day you will look back and realize they were the big things. And I've always loved those words. And I think when we spoke recently, you said we're looking for extraordinary happiness in the ordinary moments. And I think you've
Yeah.
just given some lovely examples of that. Can I just turn us to a couple of what I might think of as the unhelpful narratives we have around busyness? There was one I saw mentioned in the chat earlier about, we almost treat it as a status symbol. How are you? I'm busy. It means I'm sort of valued, I matter, I'm important in some way. And so with that in mind, I've often tried to be a very productive person. And I
Mhm.
think that I fell for what I'm calling now the kind of the sort of myth of productivity, or the idea that the more efficient I'll get, the more I'll get done, and then suddenly it'll all be fine because I'll just get more done. But of course, the more efficient you get, you just fill up your timetable with more stuff. So the point isn't
Absolutely.
really that, I mean, it helps to use your time wisely and get through the tasks you have to do quickly. And that isn't the solution. I found that wherever I went, wherever I worked, a lack of time would follow me around. It wasn't that I worked in jobs that always had that problem. It was that I brought that problem with me wherever I went. And so for me, part of this was choosing to add on to my own to-do list some things around like spend time with my children, be really present, meditate, do a gratitude list. So I built those into my productivity moments. I call it the to-be list rather than the to-do list. But let's on this point. I mean, it feels like we're sold a story about busyness equals success and productivity helps. Uh,
Yeah.
what do you think?
Yeah, and I think it's really important to recognize that, in fact, yes, busyness has become somewhat of a status symbol because if you're doing a lot, then you're asked to do a lot and you are needed and in high demand and important. But recognizing that the doing of things in doing a lot and doing them quickly is pulling out the, like, it's sort of irrespective of the value of any of those items on your to-do list. Um, and instead of, and actually, it's so actually, I would love to share this analogy because it sort of gives the language and I think is very helpful. And I think back often when I'm making my own time spending decisions. And it's an analogy that's you may have heard, and it was nicely shown in the short film that I shared in the very first day of my class. And in the film, a professor sort of walks into his classroom, puts a large jar on the desk in front of the class, and then into the jar he pours golf balls, and they reach the top, and he asks, "Is the jar full?" And they're like, "Yes, it looks full." But nope. Then he pours in pebbles up to the top. Is the jar full? And they're like, "Yes, it looks full." But no. Then he pours sand into the jar up until the top. Is the jar full? And the sand is filling all the spaces between the golf balls, between the pebbles. And he's like, "Is it full?" And everyone's like, "Yes, it looks full." But no. Then he pours in two bottles, or he brings out two bottles of beer, opens one, pours it into the jar. He opens the other, and then he goes and sort of perches himself on the desk and he takes a sip and he explains, "This jar represents the time of your life. The golf balls are the things that really matter to you, like the time with your family, like the parts of your work that are so nourishing and so in line with your purpose. The pebbles are the other important things, like the house, the car, the job. The sand is everything else. The sand is all of that stuff that fills your time, that fills your to-do list without you even thinking about it." And what's really important to know is that had he poured the sand into the time jar first, all of the golf balls would not have fit. And that shows that, like, if we let our time get filled, if we let our to-do lists get filled by others' requests, or these sort of like inertia of like, that's something I meant to do, or something I have to do, or like you're not even thinking about it, it's just you're doing it. If we let our time get filled, it will absolutely get filled, but not with the things that matter. And so, what we need to do is put our golf balls into the time jar first. Put those things that do really matter to us into our schedule. Put it on your calendar. Protect time for it. Because then it will ensure that you spend the time. And it's like, yes, the sand, all those to-dos will fill the rest of the time, but that's okay. Yes, we will be busy, our schedules will be full, but at least this way, we're also investing in those things that matter. And then someone was like, "Well, Professor, what's the deal with the beer?" And he's like, "So glad you asked." The beer goes to show no matter how busy you are, no matter how full your schedule, you always have time for a drink with a friend, right? And so whether it's a drink with a friend or it's those moments that it's like we actually do have time to show up for these little pleasures if we pay attention. And so, those things that folks wrote in answer to your initial question of like, what do you wish you had time for? Reading, like maybe getting a degree. But it's like or exercise. It's like, actually, if that's something that matters to you, painting, if it's something that matters to you, actually put it into your schedule, protect time for it, and then because the rest of like email will always be there, no matter what. But if you let your time get filled with email, then you won't also have time for reading or painting or these things that bring us joy.
So I love that metaphor of the golf balls and the fact that had you put the sand in first, the things that matter wouldn't all fit. And I love your reminder of the exercise we did at the start. So why don't we, because we're action for happiness here, not just thinking about it, let's put that into action, folks. Think back to the start of this event when Cassie was encouraging us to think about something we really would love to do but don't have time for. And ask yourself, when in your next couple of weeks, will you make time for it, and how perhaps? So if you'd like to share or take a moment to think about it, but really let's turn this wisdom from Cassie into positive intention. What are you going to try to make time for over the coming week, 2 weeks? And really try and visualize that and how you're going to make that happen. And if you'd like to share again a few in the chat, we'll see what people are going to do. So
Yeah,
sorting out crochet projects. I'm going to make
and
time for self-care. Yeah, go on, Cassie, please.
also, I noticed that someone in the chat asked, like, here I am talking about the importance of those friendships or those people that we love so much and making time for them. And the question was like, well, what if they don't live near me? And the good thing is that while our technologies, our phones are very distracting, the technologies actually allow us to connect and spend quality time with those people who are far away. It's just a question of carving out and making that time. So I've had students sort of set up, I was talking about my weekly coffee date with my daughter. One of my students, sort of following the class, he set up a weekly cup of tea with his grandmother who lived across the world. And they would sit on FaceTime and have their cup of tea together. And that was truly quality time. And so it is, if we are intentional and, as we see people really thinking concretely, how do I actually create time in my schedule and set up the time that I'm spending in such a way to protect time for these little, and again, it's like 30 minutes, maybe an hour, maybe. But it is time that you actually have if you're sifting out the sand, because these are the golf balls and these are the things that matter.
And while you've been saying that, there's been such a lovely array of very practical, concrete things people are planning to do, from time with loved ones to revisiting their rituals to making appointments to picking up old hobbies. So thank you everyone for sharing those. We will share the transcript of the chat in case you'd like to reflect back and be further inspired by each other's ideas. But in a moment, we're going to come to questions. So please use the Q&A function if you've got a question for Cassie, and you can vote on each other's questions if you see one you like and you'd like to have it asked. Before we go there, I just wanted to really lean into this idea of what matters. In some ways, that golf ball metaphor reflects the things that matter. I've had a reconnection with what matters. Not for the first time in my life, but recently my dad was very ill, had a heart failure and nearly died. I'm really grateful that he's still with us and has made a sort of recovery of sorts. And in some ways, it shouldn't need those kind of moments to wake us up, but of course it does make everything else sort of, it puts into perspective, and it helps you realize that, of course, this thing that was super important work-wise this week can wait while I go to the cardiac ward, and so obviously that's something I'm very grateful for, that I've had the chance to be with Dad and he's still alive. But what is it, or how can we in our daily lives bring that sense of preciousness about time with loved ones, or the things that almost we don't realize how vital they are until those moments have gone in some ways? How can we keep that alive? In fact, I think you've got some tips on this, haven't you? You had a sort of, is it counting time exercise? How does that work?
Yeah, and I am sorry about your dad, and I'm so happy to hear that you still have more time with him. And that sort of observation that you had is when we are recognize the limited nature of our time, the preciousness of our time, it does put things in perspective. It does make us actually notice the good stuff that's already there. Actually, in my research, we have found that as people get older, and it's really not about getting older, it's just recognizing that the time that we have in our life is more limited, people savor more. They actually notice the extraordinary happiness that's right there in these ordinary moments, like the moments that people shared when they were reflecting on their last few weeks, what were their sources of joy. Um, but hopefully we shouldn't need to have the sort of near passing of someone to sort of make us take stock and get that perspective and understanding and source of gratitude. And so something that I encourage folks to do is to count your times left doing something that you love so much. Because just because something is an everyday type experience now, it doesn't mean that it's going to continue to happen every day, and certainly not like it does now. And so, even taking my weekly coffee date with my daughter Lita as an example, this is something that we've done every week since she was 4. But recognizing that she's now 9, and when she turns 12, since I know from her big brother, she's not going to want to go on weekly coffee dates with me. So it'll maybe be once a month. And then she's going to go off to college. And so she'll live somewhere far away. So in this counting times left exercise, what you should do is identify something that does bring you joy. Maybe it is exactly one of those things that you reflected from your previous weeks. And count, sort of estimate how many times have you done it in your life so far? And then count like accounting for factors and then your life that will likely change, accounting for factors if your joyful activity involves someone else, accounting for factors in their life that will likely change. How many times in the future will you do this activity? So for Lita, I calculated this, and then you sort of take of the total times, what percentage do you have left? And I recognize that Lita and I have approximately 36% of our coffee dates together left. That is much less than half, and she's only 9 years old. And at first you're like, this is not happy at all. This is making me cry. But the impact of it is very positive and very profound, because when you recognize the preciousness of these times, it absolutely makes us make the time. No matter how time poor I am feeling, no matter how busy I am feeling in any given week with the pressures of work and all these other demands, I absolutely protect time for those our weekly coffee date. And now it doesn't happen on Thursday mornings because she starts school too early. She's in elementary school. Now we have it on the weekend, but it's this 30 minutes on the weekend that is our time together. So it motivates us to make the time, but also what it does is it impacts how engaged we are during that time, right? Usually I have my to-do list running in my head, or I'm like on my phone trying to get things done. But knowing that this time is like, I don't want to miss it thinking about what's next. So I put my phone away during my coffee dates. I quiet that to-do list. I am absolutely in it, paying attention to her and savoring those 30 minutes. And it's only 30 minutes. But those 30 minutes absolutely color how I feel the rest of the week, right? Like I'm look forward to these dates. I like think back and remember them. So it's not just the 30 minutes. And when I'm like, how, as what happiness is like life satisfaction, not just how we feel in our lives, how we feel about our lives. And my relationship with my daughter, partly because of those 30 minutes we spend each week, is so beautiful and so wonderful that it makes my satisfaction in life like it gives it that boost. So this is also going back to what we said before. It is not about quantity of time, how much we have available or how much we spend. It's totally the quality of that time, making time for the things that matter for us, prioritizing, but also when we're spending that time, making it count, paying attention, savoring it, sort of soaking it up, because we are so busy, but we want to make those golf ball moments like have the biggest effect that they can.
And because you've got that sort of counting the times left and realizing that it's finite and precious, I think it accentuates that desire to be really present, to be, it's not just a
Totally.
mindfulness exercise so much as like, this is really special. I've got to like be here now. So I
Yeah.
really love that. Thank you, Cassie. Let's come to some questions. So Hillary has asked or made the point that nowadays you have to schedule time with people in advance, and that takes time with messages back and forward on social media. I can relate to this, Hillary. Thank you. What do you do if you just don't have the time and energy for all the sort of organizing of the things that are your Gulf War moments, maybe?
Yeah, I hear you, dude. This the coordinating takes time in itself. It's not just the activity, it's actually the sort of creating time for that activity that takes time. Um, and the thing that I would say is the recognizing that it does matter, particularly for those things. If it is so important to see your friend, putting it out there and being like, these are the times I am available. When can you do it here? You know, and not taking it personally if they're like, you know what, I am so busy. And also, I have found that actually sometimes it's the spontaneity that gets the cake. It's like, you know, when I was talking about that beer, that final thing in the jar, that it's like, yeah, the scheduling of like, how are you gonna like put it into your calendar? But then the day comes and it's like, you know, give your friend a ring and be like, any chance you have time to meet up for a drink tonight? Or you want to meet for a cup of coffee? And sometimes it works. And like it is those moments that even the sort of reach out is the thing that is so important. So all to say, I hear you, scheduling is a pain. Sometimes spontaneity takes the cake, and then also recognizing that for those things that are important, it's worth getting them on the calendar despite the pain.
Yeah, well said. A friend of mine and I, we were trying to organize a group going out for a curry, and it turned out to be hard. So we just said, why don't we find a date the two of us can do? And then we'll tell everyone else we're going then. And if they can join us, great. If they can't, then we'll do it another time. And it's sort of like you don't let the fact the whole group can't get a date derail some connection. Um,
And
so
also, I will say, I think there's like really beautiful work around like actually the creation of friendship
mm,
and like initiating friendships and like building friendships, but also cultivating friendships. And there's something to be said for these like repeated schedule interactions such that you're not looking for the time. It's like my book club, which is a source of such joy for me, um, is the first Thursday of every month. And knowing that it's there, we aren't coming up with like, oh, what works for you this month? Because then we would never find a date. It is like the Thursday there. Sometimes someone can't make it, that's fine. But it's that repeated
yeah,
um, place in your schedule so that you're not having to like figure out when it will work.
yeah, lovely. Thank you. Ethel's asked a really interesting point. Can you talk about how to balance the idea of maximizing our use of time, including those precious moments, I imagine, and still having time to be sort of quiet time for relaxing and downtime?
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think it's helpful to take sort of zoom out and take a broader perspective of time, that it's not like every single hour has to be perfect and has to be like optimizing on all dimensions that matter to you. Um, we find that actually zooming out and looking at your week as a whole, or even zooming out even further and thinking about your month, that allows you to put some of these sort of blocking that like this is time for like, you know, my connection with my friends, or this is time for me to be super productive on the, you know, work stuff that matters. But also, this is time just for me to relax and do nothing, and allowing and also protecting time in your schedule for just being, you know, of, and even in Mark and I were talking about, I have some research where we showed that the benefits of treating your weekend like a vacation, which is a mindset thing. It's actually not even what you do. It's really the mindset versus treating it like a regular weekend. And what we found was that people who treated their weekend like a vacation were significantly happier when they returned to work on Monday compared to treating it like a regular weekend. And they enjoyed the weekend more. And the thing that was driving it was this sense of being instead of our typical doing mode. So the doing where we move through our weeks, checking things off our list to get it done, versus when we're on vacation, it's just about being there, right? And so and we didn't even tell people what vacation meant. We're just like, treat it like a vacation. And we saw this effect where it allowed them to settle into their time, into their activities, even if it was the same activity that they would do, on a regular weekend. Just treating it like a vacation allowed them to settle in and just to be, and maybe that rest time, that relaxation, that sort of unstructured time is something that you protect time for as
I
well.
can really endorse that one. I think it's inspired by your work, but I have a little reminder on a Saturday morning saying treat the weekend like a holiday. And I find that I'm doing the same things, like I'm going to mow the lawn and I'm going to make lunch, but it's with a lens of like I'm on holiday, and it makes a difference.
Totally.
Laura's made a really important point, and asked, what if I can't do anything other than a sort of low energy activity like TV or social media, because I'm just feeling I've got low energy and brain capacity at that time, and I can't really do anything more important or profound or meaningful. So I have the time, but I don't have the energy.
Yeah.
Thank you, Laura. It's a really
And
good question.
that is a really important question. And honestly, like the time tracking is what ends up being quite revealing because um, a lot of it is like, oh, like I don't have energy to do something. So it's like the easy thing of turning on the TV or sort of turning on your phone. Um, but notably, those low energy activities sort of bring your energy down even further versus like even if it is turning on a movie or turning on a show and being really intentional about like, oh, actually, what show do you want to watch? It's not the energy that you have to go out to the movies, but if you're intentional about like, oh, actually, what's a program that will actually be satisfying and be give you like maybe it's interesting or exciting or inspiring. And what we have found is that when people actually spend time on these things that are satisfying and fulfilling, it gives them energy as opposed to filling time and sort of sucking energy away. So it is recognizing that spending time on some activities can actually provide the energy that you might not expect it to.
Thank you. On that subject of the time tracking that you mentioned, Lack just asked, how is it best to track my time? Have you got any sort of practical tools or ways people can do that if they've never done that before?
Yeah, so on my website, cassiemholmes.com, there's a PDF that you can like, it's a super lo-fi version of like printing out a piece of paper and writing it down and rating. You could also do it in an Excel sheet. I have an app that actually, if you email me, I can share. It's sort of like in the works type thing, so that you might be able to do it on your phone. I have my students do it that way, but I actually found that the paper version is like my way. But so you can look on my website for those resources.
Thank you. Tara says she's struggling as a Brit in an American organization where being always on seems to be competitive and expected. Well, I've certainly felt that in some organizations I've worked in other parts of the world as well. And it is a genuine challenge that when you're in a culture where busyness is sort of expected. And I've
Hmm.
also been inspired to see some movements. I think there's one called, is it Parenting Out Loud, where people will consciously say, I've got to leave the meeting now because I'm collecting my child, or they're really being really like intentional about showing their colleagues that their
Yeah.
family priorities matter as well. Have you got any other sort of tips around how to respond when you're in that kind of uber competitive situation?
Yeah, and it is important because people feed off of each other and like everyone's suffering from it. Yet everyone is sort of impacted by it and scared to be the one to sort of protect their time and log off for particular times. I would just say that no one's going to do it for you unless you have an amazing manager. So that is, to mark your point, the parenting out loud, or you can just be very sort of clear of like, I will not be available during this time. Or you actually don't even have to say, be like actually you yourself logging off for a couple of hours and then returning to the work that you need to do and tell them when you're going to be available. I've actually not even like uh, outspoken parenting, or I forget how you described it. Um, my editor for my book, I saw that sort of after working on my book, she had a email responses instead of like an out of office. She would have an email response because she is expected to be very responsive and being like, I am not available for these hours because I am doing my like she's like my writing time. And so it's like being very clear that protecting time for those things that matter, whether it is parenting, whether it is just your time off that you have another commitment to do, or even being very clear that it is important and deep thinking work that you're doing that is for the benefit of the organization. But nobody's going to protect your time for you and prioritize in line with your best interests and your long-term interests and sustainability. And so some of it is the onus on you just to do that, and others will benefit from it too.
Thank you, Cassie. I think we're going to have to leave it there in terms of questions because they're pretty much out of time. Thank you all so much in the audience for your brilliant questions, and I'm sorry we didn't get to more of them. In a moment, I'm going to hand back to Cassie and ask you if you might share a kind of closing thought, because we've covered so much here, from why busyness is a problem to how we might be using our time on things that don't matter as much, but also how we can think about our time and sort of perceive it differently. So I've loved all those insights and top tips. I'd like, before we do that, just to do an exercise that we do with the Action for Happiness community at the end of all these events, Cassie, which you call the checkout. And so if wherever you are in the world right now, just take a moment to just pause, take a breath, just recognize, first of all, how you're feeling. We've just spent a really rich hour together. Notice that sort of the emotions and feelings within you, but also bring your attention to something you really appreciated about this time. If you're still here now towards the end, then you've obviously really valued this time. Maybe there's something you've learned from Cassie, or something you've thought of for yourself, something you're going to revisit, an idea that somebody else has shared that's inspired you. Just hold in mind that sense of gratitude and appreciation. And then we're just going to take that slightly outside of this group. Here we all are with the luxury to give an hour to this wonderful topic and to be together in community. There are so many people who need this and are really struggling, not just with time poverty, but with so many challenges in their lives. So let's just send some warm wishes out from this group to others around the world who could use more of these insights right now. And we remember the pledge that comes with Action for Happiness, which is to create more happiness and less unhappiness in the world. Cassie, you've definitely given us some great new insights to do that with. Maybe you'd like to leave us with a final thought to wrap this all up.
Yeah, I think that remembering that when it comes to time and happiness is about the quality of the time, not the quantity. And if we are intentional about protecting time for those things that matter, and if we pay attention during those times, then we can find extraordinary happiness in ordinary moments in the time that we're already spending.
Beautifully put. Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for being here, for being part of this community. Cassie, special thanks again for your research, for your time with us today. We will send around tomorrow a follow-up with a video from this, and also links to your book, your brilliant TEDx talk, the other ways people can follow your work. So keep up the inspiring work, and thank you. This has been very good use of all of our time, I think. See you again soon.
Great. Thank you so much.